Good afternoon, everybody. If this is your first time catching Dr. Phillips' presentation, welcome. And if you were here last week, welcome back. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be here last week to greet you all, but I just wanted to acknowledge Bernie and his effort in this regard. When I first started at Plymouth Harbor last June, I think I had been here maybe 2 months, and Bernie approached me and said, "Hey, I have this idea, I have this book, and I have this vision, and I really want to see it carried forward." And when I listened to him, I thought, this is really kind of an amazing passion to have for someone who's living in a quote-unquote retirement community. And Bernie's passion for kind of living a very full life that can change the world. I think too often we leave that to people in their 30s and 40s. Get out there and change the world. But Bernie, in his not 30s and 40s, I won't divulge anything, but still has this passion and energy and a mind for helping us all kind of realize our potential and our role in changing the world. So I welcome you back and knock 'em dead, figuratively. Please.
Well, Jeff, let me say just one or two words about Jeff. He has encouraged me so much. I am very appreciative. Not just Jeff, but other administrators have helped also. There are going to be 3 parts to today. One of them is a very brief review, followed by what I have been trying to do over this past week. Remember, what I was emphasizing in the first session was what's important is what we do between sessions, because what's involved is nothing less than attempting to actually change our self-images. Wow, that's not easy. Who knows if we can even do it to any great extent. I believe we can, and the reason why I believe we can is simply because 3 weeks ago, I didn't really develop what I think I can teach now. I had read all kinds of books, I had lots of knowledge, but to be able to actually feel confident that I can continue to develop, I didn't have it. And I was frightened. How am I going to teach people about something that I haven't developed myself? And then it happened. I just had kept working on it over time, and finally, that's what I'm going to focus on. It's exactly what happened to me. And that's exactly what Jeff pushed me to do. He said in a little conference, focus on what happened to you. Now, a brief review, then the 4 things that I experienced that held me back. I'm not saying that those exact 4 hold everyone back. I think in general they do. Other things probably hold other people back as well. But those 4 are essential, and that's what is the focus of today. As far as a brief review, okay, there were 6 ideas that I emphasized in the first session. How many of you, by the way, were not in the first session? Could you raise your hand so we'll have some idea? Okay, quite a few. Okay, I've got to go over these 6 things. The first, can everyone hear me? Okay. A little louder. Okay. Of these 6 things, the first was what changed me from a pre-medical student at Columbia to a sociology student. Contact with a sociologist who became incredibly famous, C. Wright Mills. And so his approach was interdisciplinary, whereas in sociology, the whole direction in sociology was specialization without integration of knowledge. So that set me on a lifetime path. Well, integrate knowledge of human behavior. Okay, that was number 1. Number 2 is what this book that you have represents. It is the basic problem and the basic direction for solutions with regard to the whole range of visible problems. These basic problems and basic solutions, they are largely invisible. And what they are, in sum, is our whole way of, if you want to solve a problem, normally we think, well, if there's school shooting, you focus on the police, you focus on passing laws and so on. The approach instead is that there is an invisible problem behind all of our visible ones. And that is our entire way of life. And I talked about, and the book focuses on, a bureaucratic way of life. Not as a swear word, because there's a lot of positive things in bureaucracy. But the basic idea, 3 fundamental ideas of bureaucracy: social stratification or persisting hierarchy, narrow specialization, so that even if you feel, oh, I'm improving this or I'm improving that, that's not the same as improving a whole way of life. Conformity is the third, personal conformity, outward orientation. Of course, we don't like to think of ourselves as being conformists, and some are less conformist than others, but the argument I'm making is we are all tremendously conformist from the moment we are born until now. So these 3 things and the bureaucratic way of life is extremely deep within each of us. That's why it is going to be a struggle to change your self-image toward an evolutionary way of life. Now let me put on the screen, that's metaphorically what I emphasized last time. The bureaucratic way of life illustrated by the seesaw, where you can't go up very high, and the focus is very much on aggression against others, aggression against self. The stairway, to illustrate that, it's not just an ordinary stairway. Imagine a stairway that is wide enough for the entire human race. Imagine also that the stairway does not narrow when you climb up. Imagine also that you don't only climb up, but you can interact with other people in other specialties, and they can interact with you, you can learn from them, etc., etc. So that's the vision of an evolutionary way of life. The stairway is unlimited. There's no limit to it. It keeps going up forever. That's what I emphasized, and that's what I am emphasizing now. Now that's a vision. And a basic idea for our personal evolution is to retain that vision, not to constantly, how can I evolve? How can I develop? We can relax, but we can find a way of learning to stay with that vision. Now, I'm still summarizing, but I feel I have to summarize a little bit more deeply because of the number of people who haven't been here. Now, the next step is very important. That's what we're focusing on. If you have that vision, what do you do in order to fulfill that vision? The key thing here is it is what we do in everyday life from one moment to the next that will lead to either a new structure, a new habit of personal evolution, or just a little bit here but then falling back. It has to become a structure, a habit. The questionnaire that was given out has to do with self-image. Self-image is a structure. The social sciences emphasize structure. Structures are nothing more than habits of society. We think of habits of the individual. So changing your habits of how you see yourself, that's what we're after here. Well, the rest of it, to summarize, that's the major summary there. I did some other things. We had a discussion, very good discussion, and then there was a surprise at the end. And there will be now, today, another surprise. I'm not saying what it is. We'll wait for that one. Okay, now, back to the focus. What are the 4 things that held me back 3 weeks ago that I was able to figure out? Well, you have a sheet that was given out, and one of these sheets, not the quotations, the other sheet. Does everyone have that? The title of it is Seminar Session Number 2. Do you have that sheet? Okay. Now, the 4 bold-faced headings of that sheet are the 4 things that held me back. And I want to just go over them in brief, but it's when I illustrate them with some of the non-bold-faced stuff on that sheet that you will begin to understand more clearly what held me back and what holds probably most of you, if not all of you, back, some of them or all of them. And that's the focus. All right, the first.
Do you have any extra copies of that sheet? I don't see that.
Okay, we do have other copies of that sheet. They're right down there. And let's see, I can get it.
I'll get it. Sorry.
That's all right. Just hold it a minute. Okay. By the way, what I had done as my own homework over this week, this is one of the major things I did, was go back over what was we were supposed to read for this first session. And that was the introduction to the textbook, and then chapter 1 and 2. And that sheet includes almost everything in that material. But now it is organized around the 4 basic problems. All right, starting with the top one. Now notice, if you look quickly, head, heart, hand, self-image. Those are the 4. So we cover the nature of the human being is what's involved. If you only deal with head, you're not going to make it in terms of changing self-image. But when you can change head, heart, and hand, and you have a vision, you can change self-image. All right, look at head now. And here's what held me back. Dichotomy versus gradation. Let me just stay with each just briefly, and then I'll go into them in detail. Head. Dichotomy versus gradation. Now, this doesn't mean dichotomy is evil, the gradation is good. It's not an either-or kind of thing. It's an emphasis on the importance of gradation. Now think of the number system in science. That's an example. Well, of course, all of us think, of course we are into gradation, naturally. No way. Absolutely not. Our emphasis is, I'm going back to that seesaw. Now, I'll try to prove it. I know it doesn't sound reasonable. That's fine. Wait for the evidence. The emphasis of the second, and by the way, gradation is an evolutionary direction. It's a developmental direction. Most of us think, yes, we're into that. The world is into that to a great extent. To a limited extent. Mainly because people who succeed, let's say, in teaching children to improve their knowledge, just as one illustration, that's one part of the intellect. That's narrow. And what I'm saying is gradation must be head, heart, and hand, all three. If the heart is not there, if the hand is not there, that's not good enough for changing self-image. The next thing is heart. And what happened to me, going more specifically to what held me back, was over the years, I have a little conference with fellow writers of this book. And we meet once a week on Sunday morning. We don't meet physically, but we meet on the phone. And almost every time we met, I came and I said, I've got the answer. But what happened with that was, if you think you have the answer, and then you make a little bit of a mistake somewhere, and you don't, then you know you don't have the answer. That is completely destructive. You lost it all because you thought you had it. Now, by comparison, I say, I have a direction that can lead to ever greater personal development. I don't have the answer, but I have a direction. That's gradational, not dichotomous. I'll get to this in more detail. Well, actually, it's probably better to stay with this a little bit more, not to run to the others, and to give you some of the stuff in the non-bold-face stuff there to make this clearer, stuff that's in the book that you can look at. Okay, the major thing, all right, there are several things here. There is, go down near the bottom, the third line from the bottom, Alfred Korzybski, gradation versus dichotomy. If you can see that. Now, Korzybski developed, is this loud enough? Can everyone hear? Korzybski developed a movement. He was a Polish scientist who came to this country in the late 30s, and he started a movement, General Semantics was the name. And he influenced a lot of people to join him his whole emphasis was dichotomy is bad, gradation is great. We've got to learn how to be gradational. And he tried to teach a lot of people this. There is even now, this movement still exists to some extent. There is a journal called Etc. that still follows general semantics. Now, one of my colleagues helped me to understand why Korzybski didn't succeed in changing everyone to be gradational. Because he thought dichotomy was bad and gradation is good. What could be more dichotomous than that? He tried very hard. This was the biggest movement in history toward let's teach gradation. It didn't work because he himself, now if he himself was not gradational, with all of the work that he did, you can begin to understand that it is difficult for you to learn, and it was difficult for me to learn this. A whole movement. There was even a senator from California who joined the movement. Anyway, there's another thing I want to add here. The first thing is Gould on page 12. And this is, We Are Learning Animals, a very well-known biologist. The idea, if we look at biology, see, it's not just the social sciences we have to deal with. We have to deal with the whole range of knowledge, not just biology, physics. We have to deal with education and technologies and so on. Okay. Gould. If we are learning animals, we are the only animals that learn as much, our possibility for learning with our complex language. Some other animals have languages that are not very complex. Ours is complex. We are the only organisms that have in the known universe that have the potential of evolving, not just learning, evolving within our own lifetime. We don't have to wait Darwinian for the next generation. Question, why aren't we doing it? Answer, because we're victimized by the bureaucratic way of life and we don't realize it. It's invisible. Even sociologists, with all of their knowledge of social structure, never came up to claiming, as I am, our entire way of life, not just, of course, in this country, I'm talking about the world, is fundamentally bureaucratic. You can argue with me later in the discussion. There'll be plenty of time for discussion. But that's the big problem. One of the quotes, by the way, I can't resist if I can get to it. The quote is this. Here it is. G.K. Chesterton, he's down about 3-7. It isn't that they can't see the solution. They can't see the problem. The problem is invisible. Almost all of the concepts of social science point toward invisible phenomena. Bureaucracy, social stratification, self-image. Where are they? You can't see them. Okay, let me keep going here now. I'm going to go to, I did Korzybski. By the way, if you like science fiction, there are some wonderful books written by A.E. Van Vogt that carry forward Korzybski's idea about gradation. They are right there, right after Korzybski on the list. A.E. Van Vogt, The World of Null A, and the players of null A. Null A meant non-Aristotelian, which Korzybski thought was non-dichotomous. Okay, let's move now. So that was one thing that held me back, was dichotomy. And now I'm beginning to feel better about it because look, if all these people were held back and I was held back, fine. It was a difficult thing to do. All right, number 2, not transforming the negative. Now, if indeed we are on a seesaw and we have so many negative experiences, I'm going to look at my watch here. I'm going a little too slowly. Okay. We become our own worst enemy very often. We fail, and we don't know what to do with the failure. We bury it. So when I felt I had it, I've got it, and then the least little failure, I couldn't transform it and change it into a learning experience. I mean, we glibly talk about, yes, failure should be a learning. Everyone knows this. But to actually do it is another matter. So that was number 2, was the negative. It was combined with the first thing, which was I felt I had it, and I didn't. And now let me look at what I underlined here to talk about here. Maybe I need my glasses to see this. Okay. All right, I can use another image. We don't have to stay with this image. There. That is the doomsday clock. 90 seconds to midnight. The doomsday clock is a creation of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is a journal, but there are a lot of extremely well-known scientists who come together and figure out how close are we toward midnight. 90 seconds, very close. Well, if you think of not transforming the negative, we're all aware of this possibility of annihilation of the human race. What do we do with that awareness? We bury it. Instead of, wait a second, is there something that I can do about that? And that's what I'm trying to put forward. Not that everyone here, now we can figure out how to develop a peaceful world. No. But what we did, or what I showed last time, and I didn't summarize it for those who are new, it was a 3-minute video. Someone there was a music festival outside somewhere, and one guy got up and started dancing in a crazy way. Everyone was making fun of him. But then another guy got up and started dancing. And then another and another and another. Everyone was dancing. One step at a time. How do we deal with homeless? I don't know. But I do have a direction that imagine, there are 8 billion of us. Imagine if more and more and more of us develop intellectually, emotionally, problem solving. The problems of today would be like, forget it. Nothing. They can be dealt with, all of them, because the human race, the human being, all of us in this room, all of us outside of this room, we are fantastic beings. We are the product of billions of years of evolution. There is no organism anything close to us in terms of our potential. We can solve any problem. We just have to get away from thinking of ourselves as incredibly limited people, which is what we all do. even though you might think, oh no, I don't think of myself as limited. I think I'm pretty good. Really? Compare yourself to Einstein, for example. Do you think you have something on the ball more than Einstein? I think I do, not intellectually, scientifically, but he was not as broad as I am or as any of you. He was pretty broad, by the way. He was into many things. But I'm saying he wasn't into the range of things that we're talking about in this seminar. So if you can start thinking of yourself in that way, there's no person in entire history that has achieved what we're trying to do. No one. Not the most famous people. And if they haven't done it, what about the rest of us? Of course not. I'm claiming our potential is absolutely incredible. And each of us, as we live, the potential that we are not fulfilling is enormous. This is a tragedy, a tremendous tragedy for all of us. We think of premature deaths of infants or anyone who is killed at a young age. We will die without having fulfilled more than a tiny fraction of what we could have developed and what we still can develop. It's a big statement, but I believe it. All right, let me keep going. Heart. We're still in the heart. Okay. Not transforming the negative. Here is the American Sociological Association, 52. I've written the second line of that, not transforming the negative. There are 52 separate subsections of the American Sociological Association. This is an illustration of the specialization throughout the world. And if the negative there is the specialization. Now, what the sociologists don't see their specialization as negative. No, they're working, they're developing. Every one of you sees your own specialization, your improvements in that. Oh, you're developing. I'm saying, until you develop beyond the bureaucratic worldview, that development is not enough to move toward solving the big problems of the world. We need to do nothing less than change our fundamental way of life. So what happened to me was I realized that, wait a second, I'm my own worst enemy. When I put myself down, I became aware of it. And I sort of, oh my God, I'm putting myself down again. What am I doing? This is nonsense. I turned it around. I'm going to learn not to put myself down. I became aware of doing it when I did it more frequently. And I didn't feel bad about it when it happened. Moving toward the third. Hand, unable to evolve continually. Well, I had felt if I'm into an evolutionary direction, I've got to evolve all the time. Now, the next moment. What am I doing that's evolutionary? I'm not doing it. I'm watching TV too long. I'm reading the newspapers too long. This is terrible. I'm not making it. Forget it. I've lost it. No. The book is a perfect example, the textbook. Tom Savage, my first co-author, former minister, police lieutenant, he filled the book full of little personal stories. Relax. He's a friend of mine. He teaches me to enjoy life. It's not develop. One step at a time. when it's right for you, you can do it. You can relax. You don't have to be on a treadmill of evolve, evolve, evolve. So I had felt I had to continue to be on that treadmill, and that was bothering me when I relaxed, watched TV for a while, and so on. So I got rid of that to some extent, enough so that I could be talking like this now. Well, the fourth thing is the result of that. To the degree that I was able to do those three things, I was able to change my view of my overall view of myself, feel self-confident more. Let me read some of these things that can help us to understand this more clearly. Let me stay with the third, the hand, instead of just jumping away to the fourth. And I think we're still going to have plenty of time for discussion and for the surprise. The Big Bang, 14 billion years ago, created a universe. What's the nature of our universe? Whatever else it is an interactive universe. What that means, for example, there is no part of the universe that can be totally isolated from any other part. It may take a long time for the interaction to occur, but we live in an interactive universe, and we are the most interactive creatures because of language, because of our biology, in the known universe. I'm not saying the universe, the known universe. I don't know what's out there, but the known universe, the most interactive creatures. Well, that is the basis for evolution. Interaction leads to learning, leads to development. So that is one way of feeling very good about ourselves. Now, let me move to an illustration of the fourth idea, which is self-image. And here we have, as one illustration, Jane Addams. This is about 4 lines. As one example, Jane Addams was the inventor of the discipline of social work. She was also a philosopher. And what she had was a fantastic vision of democracy. Let me read this. I haven't been reading any of this stuff. Page 11. Here's what she wrote in her philosophy book. A conception of democracy, not merely as a sentiment, there's your heart, which desires the well-being of all men, nor yet as a creed, that's head, which believes in the essential dignity and equality of all men, but as that which affords a rule of living, hand, as well as a test of faith. There is a broad view of democracy. It's not just a question of voting. And that points toward, her focus is on society with democracy. My focus is on the individual and society. But all three are essential in order to develop the kind of self-image that we're talking about. Now here's another thing I'm reading. I'm going to read page 10. Here are major figures throughout history, all of whom focus on the incredible potential of the individual that is unfulfilled. Page 10, I just mentioned names mainly here. Socrates claimed that, quote, the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, how many of us examine our lives? Really go back to who we are, what happened to us in the past. How frequently do we do that? Very few of us do much of that at all. including me, of course. Okay? Here's some other people. St. Luke in the New Testament. Physician, heal thyself. Same idea. Focus, the outward focus. Well, I don't know what I did with that. And I don't know, yeah. The outward focus. There it is. The outward focus is there on the seesaw, not on the stairway. Who else? Voltaire, the French philosopher of the Enlightenment era, stated, "We must cultivate our garden." Well, of course, that's a metaphor for yourself. Funakashi, no, very few people know about Funakashi. He was the father of modern karate. And he claimed, first know yourself, then know others. And then we have another example. Walt Kelly, who invented the cartoon character, the opossum Pogo exclaimed when he saw a litter under a tree, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." Well, those are just some examples here for self-image. I've given a lot of stuff here. The time, we've gone almost 3/4 of an hour. I think the time is ripe. Let me make sure. Yes. The time is ripe for discussion, question, and so on. So I'm going to step down and get a little closer to you folks. Think of questions that you want to, comments, questions, anything. And we're going to we have a microphone that we can take to you, and I'm going to, all of this is being transcribed, is going to be put on YouTube. By the way, I should mention, if you want to see, especially those of you who missed the first session is on YouTube. What you have to do, and all the sessions will be 2 days after our session, it will be available on YouTube. What you do is go to the following website, behavioral scientists, plural.com. I'll repeat that, behavioral-scientists.com. 2 days after this session, it will be on YouTube. And the same for the first and third and the fourth. So I'm coming down. The microphone is going to go to anyone who has a comment or a question, and we'll see. Okay. Now, I can keep going forever here, but the floor is open. I'm looking for people who have any kind of comment. So just raise your hand. Okay, where is...
I'm right here.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of things, but I'm concerned with the evolutionary stairway
Okay.
and how the top of the stairway is resolved by society.
I don't understand. What do you mean by resolve?
Well, if you have figures moving up the stairway, what did you say, 8 billion? All of the figures moving up, and there's plenty of room
I see.
for them to move. What happens at the top of the stairway?
I see. Okay. The question is, what happens at the top of the stairway if these 8 billion people are moving up? I think, I'm not sure, but the implication of that question is that the stairway is narrowing in as you move toward the top, so only a limited number of people can be up there. Am I right on that?
Well, that's part of what I'm thinking. I'm way ahead trying to resolve this, but I'm anticipating either a leader or an anarchist.
Okay.
If we're thinking of one individual or maybe a group of individuals with the same aim.
All right. My image of the stairway is simply, there's no one at the top. It does not narrow in at all. There is room for everyone, every member of the human race to move up infinitely. So imagine the stairway. Also, it doesn't narrow so that nothing is stopping you from going as infinitely, as high as you can. And you can also move laterally on the stairway so that you can move away from your specialization and learn another specialty and another and another. Does that answer your question? It's a vision. It's hard to see that vision because, just as an example, in sports, there's always a winner and a loser. In all of our institutions, there are people at the top. And think of an example of something different. Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. One of the things when there was the game, there was some game that was being played, and Alice said, "Everyone has won, and all must have prizes." Well, we don't have sports like that, but we could have sports like that. Other questions, other comments? Yes,
My comment was,
just a minute.
thank you.
Please talk into the microphone.
Okay. I was just going to say that I've envisioned the stairway as infinite, and it reminds me of one of my favorite sayings from the Talmud, which is, "It is not upon you to finish the job, neither are you free to desist from it." And that's what I'm thinking of as a process. It doesn't end, you just keep going.
And so I don't know if I have to repeat that because you did very well with the microphone. That is what has stopped me when I had my 3 week ago fear that I couldn't keep going because what I was facing was this situation. Imagine yourself in my situation here. Suppose I said, "Get up here and start lecturing." That, for most of you, it would be a difficult thing, especially lecture about something that's never been lectured about before. It was difficult for me, and it would be difficult for anyone. But I felt with those 4 ideas, and I had been working on them. Every week I came to the group and I've got it. I really felt I had it. And think of Korzybski, with all of his efforts to get a gradational approach. A gradational approach is an evolutionary approach. We can do it. We are human beings. We've got it inside of ourselves. We've been taught differently from our birth, but we can be taught differently. Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Cornell, Penn State, the major universities throughout the world, as you climb them, they get narrower and narrower in terms of your specialization. They don't teach us what I'm talking about. They teach us a bureaucratic way of life. I'm not saying that they don't contribute a great deal. They do. But what is needed is integrating that knowledge, which we do not do at all. Yes, get the microphone.
I just have, maybe it's more of a comment, but when you mentioned that about Alice in Wonderland and everyone won a prize, what are we going to do about all these kids that are growing up today? Everybody gets a victory trophy.
Everybody is what? I'm sorry?
Gets a ribbon. there's nobody at the top above them. They all get the same thing. You don't win. They all are just there. The same is true, just for example, the women's basketball team. And these teams always go to the White House. The First Lady has said the second place team should come to the White House. What are you going to do with all these things if you apply this? Where are we going to start it?
You know, the question is, what are we going to do with present deep problems like the kind of, quote, education, unquote, that many kids get in life? And I can add to that, what are we going to do about the doomsday clock? What are we going to do about climate change? What are we going to do about school shootings? What are we going to do about homelessness? My answer is the potential. I don't have a quick answer, but it depends on you, and it depends on everyone here. It depends on us. Because this may seem crazy, but I'm saying here and now, what we are doing is unique. We can be a searchlight that shows how other homes or other organizations or other people, but let's even focus on Plymouth Harbor. We can demonstrate in what we do to other residents, to the workers here, what can be done by them. And if we can do that, this is the 3-minute video, is what I'm saying. We have it in our hands to change the world. Not just me. Unless you folks do your homework with regard to working with these ideas between one session and the next, it's not going to happen, because you've spent a lifetime. We've spent a lifetime in a bureaucratic way of life that teaches us our limitations. Even if we have PhDs all over the place, that doesn't do it. What does it is a framework that can teach us in our own everyday life how to develop a vision of our own potential and act on that sometimes more and more. It's up to us to answer your question. We here hold the possibility, right here. Plymouth Harbor can be the city on the hill, the beacon for the entire world, right here and now. It's up to you. Other comments, questions? Yes, could you get a microphone there?
First of all, I want to thank you for a very difficult and interesting presentation both last time and this time. It takes a lot to get up there and be able to do that. So my comments are many, but I will just start a little bit. You started with the question of bureaucracy.
Right.
If I remember correctly, and it's a long time, Max Weber defined bureaucracy, charismatic leadership, and authoritarian leadership. So I would ask you to start with the question, is bureaucracy more of a problem than charismatic or autocracy? Think of the autocracy in terms of the current China, North Korea, Iran, etc. Are they more able to get out of situations because that background is different from our own? That's a complicated question, but I'm interested in whether people in other situations are better able to fulfill themselves.
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. a short answer, but I'm going to give you a longer answer. It deserves a very long answer. But let me repeat the question, just in case not everyone got it. Is bureaucracy really that bad when you compare it to autocracies throughout the world, like in China or Russia? Is bureaucracy evil? Is bureaucracy a terrible thing? My answer is bureaucracy is wonderful as far as it has gone up to now. In other words, well, let's get back to Max Weber. Max Weber, sociologists swear by Max Weber as the key person who understood bureaucracy. And what Max Weber concluded is bureaucracy is really the best we can do in terms of human organization. Now, there have been, he had a more complicated definition of bureaucracy, and mine is a little simpler, but unfortunately, modern sociologists in general, there are some exceptions, have gone along with him. And this has stopped them from trying to figure out a better form of organization than bureaucracy. That is possible, and I'm not trying to describe, I haven't figured it out, what is a better form of organization. That's for the future. But the first answer to your question is I'm not down on bureaucracy as much as it has appeared. That what I am saying about bureaucracy, let me give an example of where I am there. There have been studies that by sociologists who have focused on ways of improving bureaucracy. So, for example, instead of a lot of levels of organization in a large corporation, there are fewer and fewer. Instead of giving the leaders of the organization a huge amount of revenue, of salary, relative to the people at the bottom, you change that, and you depend for the salary on the actual achievements. So there have been studies that focus on a more scientific organization. The orientation by scientific is you have to prove what you have accomplished. So this points toward not getting rid of bureaucracy, but a better and better organization. Now, what to call that organization? Maybe a more interactive organization where people could change roles somewhat. But I'm not trying to say the people at the top are evil and we've got to get rid of bureaucracy and start all over. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying one step at a time. We can move one step at a time toward a better and better organization that is closer to the scientific ideals of our ideals here, not just science, of opening up to the potential of the individuals in the organization. Teach them. I've got to read one thing from John Dewey. Let's see now. If I can do this, I guess I'll go up these stairs. Okay. Oh, there's my book. Oh, and I just realized there was another thing I wanted to talk about before the question period that I'm going to talk about now and then get back to the questions. We still have a few minutes. No, I guess here, let me read John Dewey. Let me forget about the other thing because there's not enough time for questions. All right. John Dewey. in his Reconstruction in Philosophy, his most famous book, a major philosopher of education and a philosopher in general, carried forward Jane Addams' vision. He wrote, "Democracy has many meanings, but if it has a moral meaning, it is found in resolving that the supreme test of all political institutions and industrial arrangements shall be the contributions they make to the all-around growth of every member of society." He envisioned that the central mission of government, business, education, religion, and the family should be to, quote, educate every individual into the full stature of his possibility. Now, how to get that going is another question, but there's a vision. And the way to get it going would be to show in an organization like this one that we can improve our, quote, productivity. Our productivity is how we empower individuals in this Plymouth Harbor, both residents and workers, not just to do their task better, but to live a fuller life. If we can do that, we can provide a model for any other organization anywhere to learn to do the same. Would they be bureaucratic? Less and less in terms of hierarchy, specialization, and conformity. There would be a different kind of organization. What we would call it, I don't know. Let me get back to other questions, and let me get down from here. Well, there was something that might be of interest, actually. Let me bring it forward here. There we go. I don't know how many of you are Star Trek aficionados, but this was based on one of the most famous of the episodes, Where No Man Has Gone Before. And in that episode, and this is going to illustrate personal evolution in a certain way, the emphasis will be on action. Okay. Now, you have the Starship Enterprise, which is going where no man has gone before, to another galaxy. And as they move into that galaxy, who is this? Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell is one of the officers. He was very high in extrasensory perception. And just as the ship was moving from one galaxy to the next, sparks enveloped the starship. The instrument board is destroyed, and Gary Mitchell fell down with sparks all over him, unconscious. And later, when they got him into sick bay, very strange things happened. He kept developing rapidly. He started reading the entire ship's library ever more rapidly. He even remembered the page numbers when he was asked, do you remember what was on this page or that? Beyond that, he started playing with the ship's controls and fooling them. From his sick bay, he could control the ship. It was, and the dangerous thing was, I'll read it, that he was following the words of the British historian Lord Acton. And Lord Acton wrote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." What a bureaucratic way of thinking, that if it's just perfect in terms of so many people that we see in autocracies. And let me read more specifically just a few sentences here so that you'll see the danger that he posed. And here we go, 310. There we go. Now here is Sulu, one of the officers, was saying, no, wait a second, let me get to something else. The corruption here, 312. At one point he says, fools, when they try to subdue him because he was getting terrible, fools, he said thickly, soon I will squash you like crawling insects. So he was getting more and more dangerous. And then here's the mathematics of it. You see, he was evolving rapidly in every way. If you want the mathematics on this, sir, Sulu said, the commander's ability is increasing geometrically. It's like owning a penny that doubles every day. In a month, you'd be a millionaire. So he was very dangerous. Of course, they figured out how to get rid of him, fine. I don't have to go into the story. But the point I'm making is this. Lord Acton's view was a bureaucratic one. We don't have to follow that view that people who are getting more and more self-empowered will act like Lieutenant Gary Mitchell. That's a product of our present bureaucratic way of life. We can have an evolutionary way of life. Now, there is time for more questions. So before I have a whole thing about it, when we end it, I have a whole bunch of things to do, but the floor is open. Okay.
Well, let me continue
Hold it.
just a minute with this.
By all means.
Do you think that Deming and the work that he did in Japan, which was, of course, to make Japan modern, or the work in China, which started in the rice fields and now has ended up with all the magnificent stuff that has happened in China, are those ways of being any better than ours in terms of fulfilling a promise?
The question is, are the ways of developing in China, for example, where there's been tremendous development of the country in terms of poor people even gaining a much higher standard of living, is that any better than ours? I would say it's similar to ours, but they are not contributing, and we are not contributing to solving the big problems of the world. And so that we have to join together and figure out what can we do to save the human race. And I'm saying, we like to think of ourselves, oh, we're democratic and they are authoritarian. And I'm saying, wait a second. Of course we're better, more humanistic than them. Sure, I'm not denying that. But we're not solving, neither of us solving the big problems of the world, which are getting worse. So that we're all bureaucratic. We may be a little less bureaucratic than them, but the whole political emphasis on democracy versus autocracy, no, we should say better bureaucracy versus worse bureaucracy. That's about the best we can do. We are not the city on the hill in the sense of a vision. Maybe we have the vision of continuing development, get rid of racism and sexism. Sure, but we are very far from that to the degree that we continue to be bureaucratic. Once again, bureaucracy is not evil, but we can go beyond that. We produce so many wonderful things with a bureaucratic way of life. I'm not denying that at all. I'm with that. Okay, other questions? Yes.
I just
Oh, wait a second. Let's get the microphone to you.
It just makes me think, what problem are we trying to solve is, in my mind, a key thing. For instance, it seems to me when my friends and I discuss problems in the country, everyone immediately goes to simple solutions. I mean, like the
Hold it a little closer to your mouth.
people immediately go to dichotomy, not gradation, and they can't get out of that loop unless I try to help them, and it's very difficult. And even if we talk about China and the United States, I can visualize by what you said that is a seesaw. And we cannot get off of we hate you, no, they hate us. And so I say, okay, what problem one of the keys I think is we have to think about what really problem we're trying to solve, which you've said, like say gun control, say anything. This poor guy on the news today was saying, if we don't stop yelling at each other and saying it's this or it's that, it's mental health or it's gun control, if we don't all get in a room together and start to say, how are we going to solve this problem together? To me, your staircase is a good example. And everyone bring your ideas, but it can't be like who wins and who loses. The whole thing about kids with getting medals or whatever for everyone, that's an old idea based on, or I'll say an idea that was happening based on the fact that people didn't want anyone to feel like a loser. But what is our real problem we're trying to solve? I mean, what's the real purpose of being on a team? It's to learn teamwork, it might be learn ball skills, whatever. It's not about winning and losing. And so I think like that whole thing about, especially if you're 6 years old, that whole attempt to give medals to everyone is part of the seesaw, because that's how people are thinking. Either you're a winner or you're a loser, and we don't want any of our kids to be losers, but they're not out of that seesaw thing.
Let me see what I can
That's
do.
my
First,
comment.
the question covers a lot of ground, but the basic idea is, how can we learn to interact with the people we think are our enemies, whether in our Congress or in the world? How can we get away from me versus you, the seesaw? And the notion I have comes back to, once again, I have to go to the book that I have an example. Well, let's see. Erich Fromm, a major psychoanalyst. I'm looking up where he wrote. Okay, Fromm, page 15, I think, hopefully. Okay. No, that's not it. 3. Well, I'm going to paraphrase. You have to love yourself in order to love others. There's no way of loving others unless you love yourself. Now, what that means in the context of this question is, if we want to interact with others in a peaceful, developmental way, we can't do that unless we first feel very good about ourselves and our own personal development. Now, that's exactly what's missing almost completely in our seesaw. Look at the seesaw. You're looking at someone else. You're not looking at yourself. Or you're being put down or put others down. But it's an outward orientation, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do right here. What I'm saying is, we can't immediately go, okay, let's love others. That's the idea. Sure, that's what we want to do. But what about loving ourselves? Unless we do that, unless we develop, and that is incredibly difficult, but that can be done.
The book that you're referring to is called Man for Himself.
That's
And that's precisely what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Which is he starts with the individual.
He starts with the individual, and we have potential that we're not using, and we can learn to use it. Our educational systems have not taught us to do this. Psychology has emphasized problems. It hasn't emphasized, like Maslow, the further reaches of the human being, a rare book that by a famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow, that emphasized personal evolution. Unfortunately, he only focused on people who were very well developed, as he saw it. But he saw the possibility of everyone moving in that direction. What I would like to do now, I have some final words, and I also have the surprise. Okay, let's see if I can get to that now. Okay. And we're going to have a little sing-along, but different from the previous one.
And now that you know that's on YouTube, I'm not getting up and dancing.
Get back on the mic.
Okay. Chapters 3 and 4 are the next focus on heart. But actually, as you can see from this sheet that I gave out, each of these chapters really are not organized around the idea of heart negative, heart positive. They cover the waterfront. So the next book that I do will be far more systematic, like the sheet that I gave out here. Now, chapters 3 and 4 we will read, but the key thing is the work that we do to try to follow through on these 4 things that I emphasize. If you don't do that, we are failing. We can't do it. It's not just the sessions. It's far more important. In addition, it has to be what we do in between sessions. Or else, think of the questionnaire, self-image. We're moving toward actually changing our self-image to become more confident, to become more developed in every way, intellectually, emotionally, action, problems. Not all the time, but insofar as you can, here and there and elsewhere. So that's what we're doing for next week. Since it's on YouTube, people can catch up. If you have friends that you think would be interested, there's plenty of room here. Invite them, by all means. We have extra books. We have the materials. I'm opening up. I'd like to see a big crowd here, if you can help me to do it. All right, now, the surprise. Now, the problem with the last surprise was that it was far too bureaucratic. Let me explain. You've got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. We're not eliminating the negative, we're transforming the negative so that we can learn from it. To eliminate the negative is a very either or, non-gradational view. So we're changing eliminate to transform. Now when you transform it, you're learning from it. You're not suddenly getting rid of all the negatives of our bureaucratic way of life. That's one change. Now another change has to do with don't mess with Mr. In-Between. Wait a second. If you think of the gradation, in-between is fundamental. That's the scientific method, one step at a time. So I'm changing that and mess with Mr. In-Between. Okay, what else? Well, let's see. There's another thing here. Wait a second. You've got to feel good up to the maximum. Wait a second. Oh, wait a second. I have a new stanza which emphasizes self-image. Instead of just spreading joy, here's the new stanza which I'm going to be singing. You've got to feel good up to the maximum. Feel bad down to the minimum. Now this gets at self-image. So all of these things come together here. So what we have here is a song that is much closer to an evolutionary way of life. Now, I suggest that I'm staying with you doing the chorus. And the chorus will start at the beginning and at the end. And in the middle, I'm not asking you to sing along with me. So I'm starting with accentuate the positive, just to remind you, transform the negative, and I want you to sing that along with me. Latch on to the affirmative and mess with Mr. In-Between. Let me repeat that. Accentuate the positive, transform the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and mess with Mr. In-Between. Okay, are you ready? Now we've got to do this as loud as possible. And if anyone wants to get up and dance, we are open to that. Ready? Set, go. You've got to accentuate the positive, transform the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and mess with Mr. In-Between. Now here's me. You got to spread joy up to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum, have faith or pandemonium liable to walk upon the scene. You've got to feel good up to the maximum, feel bad down to the minimum, have faith or pandemonium liable to walk upon the scene. To illustrate this last remark, Jonah in the whale, Noah in the ark. What did they do just when everything looked so dark? Accentuate the positive, transform the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and mess with Mr. In-Between. Come on, we can do much better than that. That's a start. One more time. Ready, set, go. Accentuate the positive, transform the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and mess with Mr. In-Between. You got to spread joy up to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum. Have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene. You've got to feel good up to the maximum, feel bad down to the minimum. Have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene. To illustrate that last remark, Jonah in the whale, Noah in the ark. What did they do just when everything looked so dark? Come on. You got accentuate the positive, transform the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and mess with Mr. In Between. That's it.